Welcome back, everybody. We're just waiting for people to join. If you are unmuted, I ask that you mute, please, to prevent background noise. Thank you. Just giving, it looks like we're still waiting on a few people. All right, I think we have everybody. I'm just gonna double check here. Yep, all right. Great. Well, welcome back, everyone. Thank you for bearing with us through that exercise. I hope that it was that you learned a little bit more about what folks are thinking about in terms of outdoor recreation around the state, and that you met someone new. And I'm going to jump into, and Kim, I'm going to ask you to share your slides again. But we are going to jump into some more detail about the application process. And I'll just wait for Kim to get that up. All right. And Kim, if you can go back. Yeah, okay, great. All right, so just a reminder, we did have a meeting on July 19th that it was called the Outdoor Recreation Grant Funding Information Meeting. During that meeting, we covered basic eligibility requirements of the VOREC Community Grant Program, as well as the Ursa Trail Grant Program, which is another program that's open through the Department of Forest Parks and Recreation right now. And if some of you are probably aware of that. And I just mentioned that because we covered a lot of basic information about the programs during those meetings, and our plan is not to review that information this afternoon. If you are feeling like you need more information about the basic eligibility and deadlines of the VOREC Community Grant Program, I do really encourage you to go back to our website. A link to the recording of that meeting is posted there. Another material that I just want to point you to is the program FAQ. It's linked at the bottom of our grant website. And we are keeping that up to date. There are a lot of great questions asked during the meeting on July 19th, and we have updated that document. So if you have reviewed that document already, it might even be worth going back and taking a look at the new information that's in there. Great. So Kim, if you wouldn't mind jumping ahead. So this afternoon, like I said earlier, what I will be doing is going through the letter of interest. Up here on the screen is just a couple of basic details about the program. And Kim, if you jump ahead one slide, there are the key application deadlines to be aware of. So, you know, we have the letter of interest open right now on the website. I know Caroline just posted that in the chat. You can go there to see the letter of interest and take a look if you haven't already. Those are going to be due by Friday, August 27th. We will be reviewing those letters of interest, and I'll be talking more about that process in a second. And inviting full applications. So we're planning to invite full applications by the week of September 27th, and then full applications will be due by Monday, November 15th. So Kim, let's advance the slide. So like I said, let's jump into the letter of interest. And I've been getting a lot of questions since the last meeting about the letter of interest and the brief project description and how detailed applicants should be with that brief project description. So I just want to take some more time to share information about that, the intent of the letter of interest, and kind of how we'll be evaluating those as you submit them. So I'll start by saying that the letter of interest is intended to be pretty high level and provide us with enough information about your project idea to help us determine if your project will be a good fit for a full application. So the idea being that hopefully it's a low barrier way for you to apply to the program without us making you spend a bunch of time getting into the nitty-gritty details if we aren't going to invite you for a full application. So to contextualize what we're looking for and how we're evaluating projects, it might be helpful for you to visualize the goal of the grant program a little better. And the VOREC Community Grant Program has always been intended to help communities get what they need to achieve their vision for what economic recovery development looks like with outdoor recreation at the center. So in other words, we're looking to fund work that is closely aligned with planning goals that communities have, specifically around leveraging their natural outdoor recreation assets. So things like forests, rivers, and trails for the benefit of adjacent businesses and strengthening the local economy of communities. So ultimately, the hope is that funded projects through this program are successful and help provide metrics and tools to show the benefits for outdoor recreation on local economies and build a foundation for the development of what we're thinking of as a designation program focused on communities that are centering their economies around outdoor recreation. So I share all of this with you um, in regard to the letter of interest because I think it's helpful to visualize the end goal. And I also know that it's pretty hard to share all of that detail in a brief project description like we're asking in the letter of interest. So to help us evaluate your project and give us the information we need, there are a couple of key things that we're looking for. So the first is clearly telling us how the community you are working with is achieving the 5 pillars of VOREC and or how your work will help strengthen those pillars or fill in the gaps. So say you're working with a community and they're or within your community and you feel like you're meeting 4 of those pillars, but your work is filling in the 5th pillar. We'll want you to make that story very clear to us in your letter of interest description of your work. The other key piece of information for the project description is making it clear how the work you intend to do connects back to your community and contributes to the growth of businesses and your community's economy. So again, I just want to come back to that the letter of interest is meant to be pretty high level. We're asking that you focus on those key pieces of information. But know that if you're invited for a full application, there'll be plenty of space and time to get into the real details of the how you're going to accomplish the work that you intend to do. Right now, we're looking for you to be as succinct as possible while telling us about those, 5 pillars of VOREC and that story about how the work that you're doing is contributing to the economic vitality of the community that you're working in. So Kim, let's advance to the next slide. And just as a reminder, the 5 pillars of VOREC are posted on the community grant website. But to review, they are to grow outdoor recreation related businesses, increase participation in outdoor recreation activities among all demographics, strengthen the quality and extent of outdoor recreation resources, increase stewardship of outdoor recreation resources and environmental quality, and finally, promote and enjoy the health and wellness benefits of outdoor recreation. All right, Kim, if you can advance to the next slide. So a little bit of information about how we'll be reviewing letters of interest. So you're working on your letters of interest now. You're going to submit them through us through the community grant website using the form link that's posted there. Once you submit your letter of interest, me and our grant program staff and an internal ranking team will be reviewing the letters of interest. And in that internal project team, we'll have Department of Forest Parks and Recreation staff from the Agency of Commerce and Community Development, as well as steering committee member or VOREC steering committee member. And we'll be evaluating your letters of interest on basic eligibility, support for VOREC's 5 pillars, like I was saying before, and the contribution to the economic vitality of your community. So again, going back to what I was saying before, that's why it's important to be really clear with those aspects and help us understand at a high level what your project is looking to accomplish. Our internal ranking team will be reviewing letters of interest under 3 main buckets. So this is to help us make sure that we're not just funding, the top 20 projects. We're looking to fund up to 25 projects, that we're not just funding the first 20 projects that look really strong. We're trying to be equitable in how we're reviewing projects. And so we have these 3 main buckets that we'll be looking at, and that includes regional projects, small local projects, and state engaged economic impact studies. And I know some of you are considering, whether or not you want to partner with other towns, or if you want to focus on your town specifically or your local area. So I just share that so you have a sense of how we'll be reviewing projects as they're submitted. The other thing to know that we'll be thinking about is how projects or where projects are located across the state. We are looking to fund work across the state, and we'll be trying to make sure that we do that when we invite full applications. So just something to keep in mind. All right, Kim, if you can advance to the next slide. And so we are going to jump into Q&A here very shortly, but before we do, I did want to give you a heads up about some key elements of the full application that you can be thinking about now. And for all projects, there are a few things that we're going to be asking in the full application. And that includes information about your work plan. So this is important in the full application. We will be asking you to give us more information about things like deliverables from your work products, and measurable outcomes. So those are things that you can be thinking about now in preparation for the full application. We're also going to be asking for letters of support if you're invited for a full application. So with letters of support, you want to think about who are your important community partners. And these are stakeholders in your work, people who will benefit or be impacted by what you're doing. And that could include businesses, it could include municipal representatives, and or even state agencies. Another aspect of the full application to keep in mind is the project map. So it's good to be thinking about your project map now, and things we'll be asking for in that project map include the location of your project activities, and the project activities on your map should correspond to your work plan and the activities that you identify in your work plan. It'll be important to call out things like adjacent streets, nearby community resources, as well as nearby natural resources, things like forests, rivers, and lakes. And finally, the other element of the full application that you can be thinking about now is the project budget. In the letter of interest, we are asking you to share an estimate of how much your project will cost and how much funding you'll be asking for. But in the full application, we'll be asking you to get into more detail with that budget. So things like identifying the project activities, the amount requested for that activity, and any other funding that might be committed to that activity. So things like match or in-kind materials or work. So Kim, let's advance to the next slide. So in the meeting on July 19th, we did start to get into a couple of additional materials that projects that are thinking about construction should be thinking about in advance of a full application invitation. And we have some more details to share with you about that now, particularly around the written landowner permission. So I'm going to turn it back over to Jess to share a little more information about that written landowner permission. Again, this is something that you should be thinking about if there are aspects of construction in your project. So Jess, I'm going to mute myself and turn it over to you.
Great. Thanks, Jackie. So as Jackie noted, we did start to talk about this at the last meeting. So if you watch the recording, you can see that. But as we all know, here in Vermont, we offer public recreation on a variety of land ownerships. And Kim, if you would advance to the next slide, that'd be great. So for this program, we are just letting everybody know as you apply, if your project has any aspect where you're either building, installing, or doing any kind of construction of anything, signage, kiosks, anything like that on private land, there are a number of options that you can use to show us that you have written landowner permission. So this is in a scenario where a town or a nonprofit is an intermediary for that public access. So you would be the grantee and there's private land involved with some aspect of your project, and you need to show us that you have landowner permission. So the first and most protective type of landowner permission, which we always accept, is easements, rights of way, or other public access covenants. So that is one way to show us that you have public access insured for these public funds. We also are developing templates for written landowner permission. So if an easement, a right of way, something like that is not possible, we will ask applicants to ask the private landowner to fill out a landowner agreement that contains some provisions that provides that public access assurance and allows your organization or town to work effectively to do this work on private lands. So we have 1, 5, or 10-year requirements for projects. So if your project contains something like snow grooming, that would just be a 1-year written agreement. If your project contains something like signage, kiosks, access for annual maintenance, mapping, and educational information, so that would be offering that type of information on a map or something like that. We'd want to see that there's a 5-year agreement in place. And then for things that are new construction or major reconstruction or reroutes of trails, parking lots, basically major earth moving type of projects on private land, we'll want to see a 10-year agreement for public access. We also require permanent public easements or a permanent public covenant of some kind for acquisitions or capital projects, things like, we can help you think through whether your project meets this criteria, but large bridges, things like that, where the life expectancy of the investment is more than 20 years, we're going to seek a public assurance commensurate with that life expectancy for the thing. So all of these lengths of time can be handled if, let's say, you are a nonprofit offering these things on your land. It will be written in as provisions in your grant agreement, and or it can be handled through these third-party mechanisms. So that's private land and the requirements that we have for public funds. The next slide, we recognize that especially this year, we may have nonprofits applying, but working with the town very closely, and the town or other or federal land, which are the two types of public land where VOREC investments can be made. We cannot invest VOREC grants on state lands. But we would want to see written letters of landowner permission on the landowner letterhead, so the town or the other entity that's public with the same length, same time frame requirements as previously. So that 1 year for grooming, 5 years for minor investments, and then 10 years or more for larger capital or earth moving investments. So that's all I have to say there, and I'll hand it back over to Jackie and I will mute myself.
Thanks, Jess. So this we did cover in the meeting on July 19th, but just a reminder that project review sheet, if you're thinking about any kind of construction, is really important, and we will be looking for that with the full application. And the project review sheet is provided by the Department of Environmental Conservation. And there is a link there on the slide that you can go to for more information about that. So in the spirit of time and saving as much time as possible for Q&A, Kim, if you can actually take down the slides, because we're gonna open it up here for some questions. And I just want to provide, before we jump into that, just a couple of instructions on how this is going to work. So I know there's been some questions that have been dropped in the chat. We are going to give folks the opportunity to raise your hand if you have a question that's coming up and you want to unmute and ask it. I'm going to be looking at the participant list to see who raises their hand and then calling on you and asking you to unmute and ask your question. Each person, we're going to give you one question at a time. If there is time at the end of the Q&A to circle back for additional questions, we will do that, as well as make space for any questions that are dropped in the chat if you would prefer to ask your question that way. So with that, I will open up the floor, and I'm looking at the participant list to see whose hand is raised. So Josie, go ahead.
Okay, hi everyone, I'm Josie Henry from Alberg. My question is about the project we're looking at could be broken into several components. And as we submit a budget, if it's too much, would you guys automatically consider lessening, or would you recommend showing component 1, 2, and 3 and the associated costs with each? So if we were selected, but maybe at a lesser amount, that would be an option. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think it's worth considering. Like we're looking to fund up to 25 projects across several buckets. So if you're asking for a substantial amount of money, we are trying to be equitable in how we distribute that funding. So making it clear, what things are most important, and so to help us as we're evaluating your project would be helpful. But yeah, I think including some of those details and just knowing that this is a dialogue that we're looking to have, that's part of the purpose of the letter of interest. And we may reach back out to you and say, we think these are strong elements for a VOREC community grant, but these elements we won't likely invite you to submit for a full application. So that is a conversation that we might have.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Great. Emily, I see you have your hand raised.
Hi, yeah. So I'm wondering what level of planning work that you would be looking at a competitive application already having, if it's acceptable to. I know that in the presentation in July, there was mentioned that some funds could be used towards planning if a community has a conceptual level plan, but not a construction building plan, if that's something that can be accommodated through the program.
Yeah, and I'll start by saying the requirement for planning in the grant program is really to make sure that the work that you're intending to do is in alignment with your community and has support from your community. So really, we're looking for that connection, and the planning that you've done is a way of showing us that you've kind of checked that box for us, and that you are in connection with the community that you're intending for your work to benefit from. So, you know, any kind of planning that you can show us is helpful. The only thing to know with the grant program is that standalone planning is not a eligible activity. We are asking that if you're looking to fund planning work through the grant program, that you're also including some sort of implementation activity along with that. And I'll just tap Jess and see if she has any other thoughts on that question, because I know we've had some conversations about the planning element of the grant program.
Yeah, so Jackie's spot on. We also are looking for projects that can be completed within 2 years. So planning that is preliminary, but for something complex that's going to require a lot of permitting, a lot of things like that would not be as compelling in the long run. So if your project has a lot of environmental permits that it needs that could be delayed, if you're having to work with other entities, those are things to be aware of as you're trying to make your compelling case. If it's a matter of like, we have a great idea, we already know we're not going to need a lot of permits for this. We've checked out the environmental impacts for the project itself. And we just need to like get some landscape design work done or some site sketches or engineered drawings done. That's fine. And then the other piece of it is, you know, we understand that communities are in a variety of different places when it comes to thinking about what it means to be an outdoor recreation friendly community. So sometimes planning can be a very helpful component, even as you are proceeding with shovel ready or projects that the community already knows it wants to do, whether it's wayfinding and signage, but gosh, we need to have a community conversation about connectivity to downtown through our recreation assets, things like that. So unlike other programs where the only planning that's allowed is like design build, the planning can be a component, and it's up to in that full application for you to tell us the story of how that planning will help achieve the overall goals of the project. But it doesn't have to be one-to-one, if that makes sense, unlike other grant programs, because we do know that that's a big need when it comes to outdoor recreation planning.
Thank you.
Thanks, Emily. All right, Casey, I see you have your hand raised.
Yep, thank you. Yeah, I wanted to again clarify a question about eligible activities, specifically some shovel-ready recreation improvements that we want to make to some of our existing parks, specifically a basketball half-court area and what I would call built stuff like basketball half-court or extending a concrete skate park ramp, etc. We see them both as improvements that are worthy in and of themselves in those parks, but also because these park areas are accessible and adjacent to the rail trail. So they're kind of complementary things that we see improving, particularly one of the parks that's literally at the trailhead, improving the recreational resources in that park, is pretty important. So could you talk about that?
Definitely. Yeah, so I mean, I think for us, it goes back to the story about, the 5 pillars of VOREC and the benefit to the economic vitality of your community. We're not precluding those activities, but the VOREC community grant program is much more focused on natural outdoor recreation assets, so forests, rivers, trails. And what we'll need to see from you is a really compelling story about how the work on your built aspects is contributing to those 5 pillars of VOREC that we talked about and the economic vitality of your community. So it's not precluded, but you just need to help us understand how that work is contributing to that narrative.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
Lori, I see you have your hand up.
Yes, thank you. So my question is similar in terms of eligibility. Just had a question about equipment that is part of the construction part of our project, and also is involved in basically the sustainability of our project, because it would be, you know, I think I read something in your stuff about maintenance, so that funds can't go towards maintenance, like regular maintenance aspects. However, you know, there is maintenance and keeping trails or whatever we build sustainable and making sure it still is functional and yeah, functional and environmentally sustainable. So I'm just curious as to what types of, and I will admit, I may be confusing a little bit of the VOREC and the URSA grant language. So just trying to figure out what is allowable in terms of equipment purchases, and if any, you know, and what isn't, if that makes sense.
Yes, yeah. And I'll just start by saying that, like, long term, we're looking to fund projects that have a plan for the maintenance of the work that we fund. And so, you know, long term, that maintenance isn't something that can be funded through the grant program. I'm looking at Jess just to, I'm going to ask her to weigh in here just because she has some experience with past grant rounds and what we've funded in terms of like tools and things. But you know, long term, we're not looking to fund sort of like the maintenance of a trail, but we are looking for applicants to have a plan for how that'll work in terms of stewardship. But Jess, I'm going to turn to you for, like, you know, what we might fund in terms of tools, or can you add some more information there?
Sure. So I think the purpose in being clear that we don't fund regular maintenance is, you know, we don't want to pay you to do the lopping and you know, to like pay your trail crew, or, you know, for the next year, because as Jackie notes, yes, it needs to get done, but a one-time slug of funding isn't going to help. We can, however, fund stewardship projects, programs, things like that. So if you wanted to create a tool cache for volunteers, if you were thinking about purchasing, materials or equipment that would facilitate that longer term stewardship goal for your community, that is possible. We prefer equipment rentals, generally speaking. Equipment purchases do come with quite a few hoops to jump through on both sides, the grantee and us. We can do that. We also, when we talk about equipment with these funds, we're also talking about, do you want to purchase a fleet of snowshoes, skis, bikes for your rec programs, equipment for your recreation programs themselves, to stand up a recreation program and have everything everyone needs? So it could either be stewardship or recreation programs and the equipment needed to support that. And we'd want to see, as Jackie's saying, what that plan is in the long term, if it's stewardship related, if it's maintenance related. Okay, we're going to stand it up this year, have our tool cache, do some volunteer events, and in the long run, that will lead us towards having a successful stewardship program. So I hope that is helpful to understand.
Great. Thanks,
Jackie,
Lori. Oh.
This is Kim, if I might jump in real quick.
Yeah, go ahead, Kim.
I have the very dry comment that we can elaborate more in the application, but from a financial perspective, the state views equipment as items purchased with a market value of $5,000 or greater from a budgeting and accounting perspective. So we can speak further to this, but you'll want to sort of flag equipment separately in your budget. There's just a few more minor rules around equipment purchases.
Thanks, Kim. All right, Jessica, I see you have your hand up.
Hi, thank you. I think we've kind of already touched on it, but just making sure that we can include multiple components to the actual project, such as either wayfinding signage or historical placards, something that helps connect the people to the actual project, such as directing them towards the river or towards the trail, as well as including, like, you know, the historical placards or information kiosks, that sort of thing. So it is okay to go ahead and do that.
Yes, yeah, definitely. Signage and wayfinding is an eligible activity.
Great. I just wanted to make sure it just wasn't just wayfinding, but we could include it along with the actual bigger type of project.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, Colin, go ahead.
Great. So I have another question about planning funds. We do have a number of deliverables included in our grant project, but we'd also be looking to get significant planning funds to use as a springboard to really help these become sustainable. You know, so we could focus, well, part of it is to transition my position to full-time year-round, so I can focus on attracting new member towns into our district and getting sponsorships, you know, so we can guarantee that the deliverables and the other planning on trails are going to remain long-term. So I guess, you know, what I'm looking to get a better understanding of is what percentage or what dollar amount per year over a 2-year period could we put towards payroll?
Yeah, and we actually have talked a lot about, and I'm looking at Kim because this strikes me as what we would call an indirect administrative cost. But Kim, can you confirm that?
Have to confirm at this time. Yeah, we need to loop back to that question, the type of making this effort and whether it is really tied to a project or organizational support. Sorry, it's tough to answer that question now, but we can continue that conversation if you have a.
Sorry, I know Kim was breaking up a bit there, but I think what I heard her say is, so I'll just preface why I asked that question, because there is a difference between costs for things like project management, for the management and execution of the activities that you're applying to the grant program for, and the indirect, what we call indirect administrative costs, or the overhead of that work. So from what I heard Kim say, it sounds like we need to clarify that a little better. If your work does fall into the indirect administrative costs, which are things like a business office, or like the money that, or like the funding that it would take to like pay bills and stuff, then the most there are a couple of different options for the percentage that we would allow in the budget. And I think, like, there's a lot more detail in our FAQ. There's a full FAQ question about that, but at most we would fund up to 10% of those indirect administrative costs. But Colin, it sounds like we need to talk about that a little bit more. And if you want to follow up with us after this meeting, we can provide you with a little more information about that specific request.
Great, I will. Thank you very much.
All right, so Debbie, I see you have your hand raised.
Hi, yes, I perfectly understand you're wanting to divide up and fund some regional projects and focus on some small local projects, but I'm confused by your economic impact studies. Does that mean that a project should have that built in, or are they purely, you know, I'm just not wrapping my head around that.
Yeah, and that's fair. And I will say, like, going back to the sort of like designation community goal of the project, like we are really excited about the increase in funds we have this year to do some like study of how the work that's funded is benefiting communities and looking at measurements for how outdoor recreation is contributing to the sustainability of economies. But I am going to look to Jess for a little more contextual information about that bucket that we have. We did convene a group early on to kind of talk about how we were going to scale up the grant program, and that was one of the recommendations that came out of that conversation, and Jess was a part of that. So Jess, can you provide a little more info there?
Sure. Just overall, each of the buckets are not, there's no set amount of projects that we're going to fund in each bucket. They were just categories that fit into sort of how we want to see projects spread out across the state with sort of a diversity of different aspects to them. So there's not like 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. It's just these are things that we want to make sure get funded and hope we can encourage applicants to think about. When it comes to the economic impact study is maybe not the right way because right phrase because it makes it seem like it's standalone, and it's not. The idea is we want to make sure that at least some of the projects that we fund, or all of them, that would be just fine too, contain some aspect where the applicant is helping provide a case study, an economic impact study that you're doing something, but you're also creating an impact study of what you are doing as part of your project. So what you were indicating, Debbie, is that. So we're not looking to, yeah, it's not going to be standalone. We should maybe make that clear on the website because that's not what we're looking for. We had, so our first two VOREC applicants, Randolph and Newport, Randolph, as part of their project, they're wrapping it up right now. They had a quick economic impact study that kind of shows the impact of their work. And I think it benefits us all to be able to tell that powerful story at the local, regional, or statewide level. So that's what we're looking to cultivate, are those sort of case studies.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jess. Okay, so we are going to start to wrap up here. I see, Rebecca, you have your hand raised. I'm going to give you a chance to ask your question here in a minute. If you dropped your question in the chat, we don't have time to get to it today, but know that we are tracking those questions and updating the FAQ on the VOREC Community Grant website. So we will look at those questions and update the FAQ where possible. And I encourage you to keep looking at that document to see any new information that we provide there. So with that, I am going to go to Rebecca. Lori, I see you have your hand raised, but if you could drop your question in the chat, that would be helpful. So Rebecca, go ahead.
Thanks, Jackie. Could you talk a little bit more about what constitutes in kind? I know a match is not required, but
yeah, so
for example.
I'm sorry, I interrupted you and I missed that last part.
Well, that's okay. Just, you know, could volunteer hours be counted as in kind, for example?
Yes, yeah. So what we're talking about with in kind is materials or, you know, volunteer time support. And so we'll be looking for you to provide a little more information about that in the project budget if you're invited for a full application. And I'm just looking to Kim in case she has any other information to share there, or if that covers it.
That covers it.
Okay, great. Well, thank you all again for attending this afternoon. I'm excited to see so many of you here. And just a couple of next steps I wanted to share. If you are thinking about whether or not you want to apply to the URSA Trail Grant Program, there are some separate workshops that Sherry, who is here this afternoon, will be hosting. The first one of those is going to be this Thursday, August 5th. And more information about that and her other workshop are posted on the URSA Trail Grant website. So you can go there for more information. The login details are going to be updated but posted by Thursday. So keep an eye out there for that. If you do want to attend the second VOREC application development meeting, again, it's going to be the same agenda, but if you want to hear from other folks in the Q&A, that meeting is going to happen next Tuesday, August 10th. Like I said, this meeting is being recorded. I'm planning to post that online as well, so it will be available for your reference. The letter of interest is open, like we talked about in detail. It's going to be due on Friday, August 27th, and we will be going through our review of the letter of interest and inviting full applications the week of September 27th. So with that, I am going to end our meeting, and thank you all again, and I look forward to talking with you as you submit your letters of interest.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.